Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix It Man. I'm going to show you how to fix a broken off tail on your surfboard here. So my wife was pretty bummed. The kids borrowed this and this is how we got it back. You know, I guess it came off the racks and got beat up pretty good, but luckily they did retrieve a couple pieces of glass here so that I can kind of follow this as a guide for the shape. Similar to what I did in that very bad nose ding video. I'll put a link to that in the description. I'm going to run a tape line, just kind of protect this and kind of use it as a reference, and so that you know where your top glass layer is, and when I sand it back it kind of gives me a reference point to stop when I hit the tape. Same thing, just kind of perpendicular to the stringer. So this is already cut back a little bit, but I'm going to cut a little bit more here where you can see it's separated from the foam. Just be careful here, don't cut yourself. So I'm just going to rough this up. This is some 40 grit just to get this really roughed up, and we'll sand the foam a little bit too to make sure that the mixture sticks. We're going to do the same thing even across the top of this leash plug here, just to make sure that we sand that top edge, and then we're going to be laminating over that. Get that started and tape together and kind of roll it around. We're way too big on this end, but you know, we kind of got the general shape. You know, since this glass right here around the cup is totally loose, I'm just going to cut this out. All right, now we're gonna mix up our sanding resin. I'm just gonna pour some in here. Most everything I do is approximate here on the measurements there, but it's about 3 ounces, 2.5 maybe. And then on this Aerosil, which is similar to the Cab-o-sil, this doesn't really increase the volume of the resin, and it says you can mix 1 to 1 and it will still pour. If you go 2 to 1 as far as volume, it will be more like a toothpaste consistency, and that's kind of what I'm going for, somewhere around there. So let's just dump some of this in and stir that up. You want to do this before you add any catalyst. Okay, you can see it's kind of getting chunky, and you can see that doesn't increase the volume even though I poured all that in there. See, this is really more for strength. The micro balloons are what will make it really light. And because it's such a large area, I am gonna go ahead and add the micro balloons too. And I'll probably have to add some more resin to this. Actually, I'm gonna do the resin first, because I think I went a little overboard on that Aerosil. And then the micro balloons. You know, a lot of times when I do ding repair, I'll do one or the other. That Aerosil is just a little too dense for this, for how large this is. Now you could always get some foam and glue it on there, or laminate it on there and reshape it, and that would work too. I just don't have any foam laying around. See, now you can see we've got quite a bit more volume, and this is feeling a little bit lighter to me. It's a little bit more fluffy. All right, actually that looks like that's probably gonna work. So this is kind of like whipped frosting if I had to compare the consistency. Whipped frosting or whipped cream cheese, it's actually pretty light. The micro balloons really help lighten this up. So now I'm gonna go ahead and add catalyst, but I'm only going to add it for, let's just say 3 ounces, which is about where I ended up. So I usually do about 10 drops an ounce, about 70 degrees outside. So I'll probably do around 25 to 30, somewhere around there. I kind of just usually play it by ear, but usually 10 drops per ounce works pretty well. Just want to mix it for a little bit here before we try to put it in there and spread it around. Just make sure you get all the way to the bottom of the cup there. That should be good. We're gonna go ahead and just goop this in here. and just kind of use the popsicle stick or whatever you are using to stir. Just try to force it all in and around up against that foam, and it'll stick pretty well. This form is a little big, so I'm going to try to pull some of this material away from the outside edge and smooth it over here where we need it. Pretty nice how light this stuff is feeling. I was a little worried about the size of this adding some weight, but that shortboard video that I did, the sea winch, the bad nose ding, I thought it was going to be too heavy, but it worked out fine. I'm sure this will be fine too. Yeah, there we go. Alright, so I just threw a couple stacks of cups here to hold this up. It was kind of sagging, and I could see the tape was kind of bulging out the bottom, which was where a lot of that material was going. Now I've got it propped up and level. Looks like we are pretty good. As long as that doesn't move around, I think we'll be good. We'll just let that set up, and then we'll come back and take a look. Setting up pretty well here. I'm gonna go ahead and strip off the tape and see what we came up with here. See how this looks. This edge is still kind of gummy, not completely solid. So you're gonna want to be careful if that's the case, because you could, you could knock this whole thing off. Now we got a little void over here, so we'll have to touch that one up. That's all right. I guess I'm happy with that overall, other than the fact that we missed this little spot here. I'll show you the underside. So I kind of wanted to fill this in a little bit more, that foam area. So what I'll probably do is just, I'll try to sand this down a little bit, but I'll probably do another batch right here to fill in this edge and a little bit of this area here. So you can see we've got some low spots, maybe not too low. I'm going to keep sanding this because this is still a little higher than the deck as this kind of tapers down. But I'm going to flip it and see where we're at on the other side. But overall, this looks like it took. It's bonded pretty well. As long as I don't push down on it, let's just keep our fingers crossed that it doesn't snap off. Once we glass over it, it'll add the strength and it should be okay. But I'm just going to try to bring this down so it's somewhat level and flat with where the deck was. I may have to touch up some of the top here too if there are some low spots, but I definitely got to deal with that void. I'll do that from the other side. Well, starting to take shape here, I guess. I'm gonna go a little bit more, see if I can get rid of this little low spot here, and then I think we might be okay on the top. We need to go a little bit more over here on this side. Again, this is just kind of a guide. I know it's not even perfect, but that'll kind of tell me, how much I can go. And then on the bottom, I need to flip it over and sand a lot more there too. But I keep going a little bit more, bring this down. So that's what it's looking like now. I think we're close enough to go ahead and fill this other part in. And I noticed right here, our glass is still kind of loose from the foam, so I think I'll take out another little piece and re-pour that. And then we'll let that cure and then sand it up. Just for strength, I'm going to throw in some of this Aerosil again. And to make it easier to sand, I'm still going to put in some of these microballoons. So we've got about an ounce or maybe a little less. I'll just do 8 drops catalyst. See, I'm lifting the popsicle stick off. If there's any dust or debris on there, it'll kind of lift that off and mix it in, and it'll seem to adhere a little bit better. So I know that's not perfect, but that's close enough, and it's starting to get a little tacky in the cup here, so that means it's time to stop. Let that set up and then we'll come back and take a look. All right, so this is completely cured here. Peel off the tape and see where we're at. So we'll just knock this back down. I'd say we're getting a lot closer to the overall shape. Just kind of using my hand to try to get the right shape on these rails. It's kind of tricky because, you know, it's got this little kick coming this direction, but you've also got the tapered down rail with a hard edge. So we're getting it. It's just kind of taking a little bit of time. And again, here's that piece I've kind of been using as a guide. And you can see we're pretty close to where that leash plug cutout was to our original shape. I just want to kind of show you how it's looking. See, our color line is right here on the edge. Normally, you know, this would lap all the way around, or it would, you know, the color would lap from the top and there would be an overlap. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to color mix this as best I can. It won't be perfect, but I'm going to try to get this color here. Wipe it off and you can kind of see it's got kind of some speckle colors in there too, but I'll just try to match kind of the main base here. And I think I'm just going to do that on the first laminated layer, and I'll do it right to the edge. I'll tape that off and then cut it, and then do the same thing on the underside, just to try to bring the color back. And so we'll have a seam here. When I do a second layer of glass, I'll just fold it over and blend out. But just for the color, just for the base, I kind of like to do the color underneath the final layer, so it looks similar to how the board looked, rather than doing like a patch with a color in it. You know, I think that'll look a little bit nicer. That's pretty close, so it's kind of got a little overlap. Okay, we'll just make sure that that tape is on there really good. Again, I'm just kind of trying to follow this color line here. It's kind of not as noticeable up here, but it kind of does overlap a little bit. So that's just what I'm going to try to use down here at the tail. I'll just see if I can cut that out. Not great, but it's kind of a circle. I get all my stuff from a place called Basham's in San Clemente, and they'll give you the leftover glass from glassing a board. So pretty cool of them. I think it's great that, you know, it's recycling. Now, since we're not really wrapping this, I'm not going to be so worried about all these relief cuts there. So just going to use just straight laminating resin on this one, and well, and then we're going to try to color match it. So it's not going to take a whole lot to cover this area. I'm really not even worried about getting all the way to the top of the tape, just making sure that we do get all the way down over here. About that much. I know I should probably measure stuff, but I don't. Now, you don't want to catalyze this or anything until you have the color matched. This is not a completely opaque color on this board. It's kind of a translucent. So because of that, I'm just going to be really, really, really light on the color. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll mix just a smaller batch of resin just to kind of get the base color, and then I'll add it to the resin. I'm gonna kind of split this. Once I've got the color close, even if it's really too strong, I can just add a little bit by little bit into that. That's all the white I'm gonna use. Just a little tip of that, and then just kind of mix that in. So the next color I'm going to add is just a little bit of blue. And when I say a little bit, I'm talking like like that. A little goes a long way. You'll be surprised at just that little bit of blue. See that? So obviously that's way too much blue. But that's why I'm doing it like this. I'm kind of splitting this, mixing it in a smaller amount first. We'll try to get the similar tone, and then we'll add that to our laminating resin. But this is just, this is just a really small amount of resin. But so obviously got too much blue. That's okay. We're gonna try to add some yellow. I'm just gonna wipe it on the side of the cup, and then we'll just kind of grab it, pull it down as needed. There we go. Now, of course, that's a much stronger color, but it's kind of getting in that general color shade or family of what we're looking for. A little too green still, and definitely a little too strong, but see, I'll just kind of put a little dab right there. So same kind of shades and family. I could almost wash that out with a little bit of black, which will kind of tone it down and bring it more into the grays. I might do that. And I'm just gonna same thing with the yellow, just do a little bit on the side of the cup, and then we'll mix that, grab a little bit of that black, pull it down into the mix. It doesn't really look much different, but I think we're pretty close overall in the tone. Again, it's a little too strong, but that's my reason for doing it this way, is we can mix it, and then now let's add a little bit at a time. So see, I just poured a little bit of that color into our little batch of resin here, so it won't overtake it. Now, I'm not very good at this, but it's kind of a learn as you go sort of thing. Okay, that's definitely getting there. Don't be afraid to really test it, put it out on the board. You can always wipe that up, clean it. That looks pretty close here. I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but this has got some sort of weird speckled texture. I don't know if that was just overspray from something, but it's definitely on there. If you're doing multiple repairs, helps to mix up some of that color and then set it aside and just add it to the batches of resin as you need. You can spend a lot of time play around with that back and forth. I might be a little too transparent here, or translucent, so this white might show through. I'm not gonna really worry about perfection on this, but at least it won't stand out, I guess, too bad. But here, we're gonna go ahead and just catalyze this. So I ended up with about 2 ounces, maybe 1.5 to 2 ounces. I'll just do about 15 to 20 drops. I just like to make sure that that catalyst is really mixed in. Usually takes about 30 seconds or so. Just kind of pour it out. I like to use these foam brushes. They work pretty well. Yeah, I can already see that the light spot is really going to show through. Oh well. That's what I get for doing it translucent. Now I might have to change my mind and do color on the next layer here too. I could always do this same color in a top coat here real quick. Okay, it feels like the resin is starting to go off because it's starting to tug a little bit on my brush. Hopefully that will make it more tacky and make it stick up. I don't have to keep doing this. So 2 mistakes I feel like I made here is not leaving that glass long enough. Even though I got it taped, I should have just left it longer so it would wrap around and stick a little bit easier. And number 2 would just be the color itself. I feel like it's a pretty close color, but didn't make that color strong enough in the resin. I'm gonna do another layer, just a hot coat on this. Now that's not traditional. You'd usually do your other layer of glass, but because of the color seam, I'm doing it a little bit different. Just gonna do this laminating layer here. Wish the color was a little bit darker, but that's okay. I'm gonna do the a hot coat with a really dark or a stronger color. Hopefully it'll cover that up a little bit better, and then we can sand it and prep it and do another lamination after we do the same thing to the other side. So that's what I'll do. I know you guys are gonna tell me in the comments that I'm a total idiot, don't know what I'm doing, and I guess you're right, but that's all right. So now I've mixed up some sanding resin. Same process, just mixed a smaller batch first and then just kind of poured it in here with some more resin. I didn't show you the whole process because I had to charge the camera, but on the pigments I just did do a little stronger. So I'm hoping that that will cover up this lighter spot here, or at least blend it in a little bit better. That looks pretty close. It still might be on the light side, but that's okay. And then as I sand this, I'll be able to feather that color out where it's near the tape. So just so we don't end up with a hard line with two different colors. But whatever, like I said, I'm just all trial and error. So I've only got about an ounce here, so we'll do 10 drops of resin, or 10 drops of catalyst. I'll mix that up. Now I didn't say it earlier, but make sure you're working in a well ventilated area, or wear a mask, especially when sanding, just so you don't inhale all that stuff. It's not good for you. Now let's see how that looks here. So it doesn't need to be a thick coat here, just enough to cover that laminating resin. And I was hoping that the color would be a little closer, which it looks like it's gonna work out okay. I'm probably not gonna mess with this same color anymore. That's it. Once we sand this, that'll kind of feather it back. And then I do want to do one last layer of glass on this, which I'll probably sand a little bit more of the deck up here and feather that back in, just to add extra strength. Since we're making this seam right here, normally you don't do that. I don't know, just doing it to try to get the color right, or the look of the board, at least close to what it was. And I'll have to sand back to find that leash plug there too. Hopefully when I'm sanding, I don't have to take off too much of this color. We'll see how it turns out. All right, so that's what it's looking like right now. This is just that first layer of glass on the top with laminating resin, and then the sanding resin just to try to get the color a little bit stronger there. So I think it's gonna work out all right. We'll let this cure, and then we'll come back and start sanding it. And we'll do the same thing on the other side down here, which is our lighter, kind of our white or faded yellow color. This has been curing for several hours, so it's good to sand. I'll go ahead and just start bringing this back here, and then we'll just I'll probably flip it over and sand the other edge, that little lap that I did, and then we'll get ready for the other side. I'm going to switch to 100 grit here. Now this is still not finished sanding, but I just want to get back underneath this tape here, expose that edge, and then just try to feather that in without sanding it down too much. I realize we're going to have to get down and probably take off some of that color to get that back down to the level here, but I'm really trying to do it as little as possible so that we can preserve some of that color that we ended up with. So you can see that's really where the tape comes in handy. Of course, anything that overlapped it isn't going to stick to the board, but it kind of helps you bring this back down to the right level without going too far, or without getting ahead of yourself. Sometimes I'll just sand it with the electric sander or the battery sander until I get down to this point, and then I'll just grab a piece of sandpaper and just kind of feather that in by hand. Plus we've got to get this roughed up for the next layer. But I wanted to get rid of this transition on this layer so we can take this tape off and probably go a little bit farther to overlap on the glass with no pigment or no color. Yeah, we got a little bit of color loss around that leash plug, but I think we're gonna leave it. Not gonna try to do any more color on this side unless I screw something up really bad. Time to get that leash plug exposed. See if I can do that without making too much of a mess here, but I think I'll just try to use one of the corners here. That was a little bit easier than I thought. And now that I think about it, I probably should have just left this until the end. Well, I'm going to sand that back a little bit more and expose that. Well, we got a little hump right here that I can see from the side, but I'm just afraid if I take that down too much, it'll take off our color. Our color's not perfectly consistent here anyway, but for what we're doing, that'll probably pass. Need to flip it over and sand off this edge. All right, I'm really close to this tape, so I'm just gonna go ahead and do this. Peel it up and cut back any of this, and then I'll just clean it up with a piece of sandpaper. There we go. Right about there. And then we're just gonna rough this up so that it all sticks really well. So here's where we're at. This is the that bottom edge. See, I kind of got that color just on the top side. Now really we could just call it good and laminate another layer, you know, wrap the edges or do a top and bottom layer and then a hot coat. But last video I did, a lot of people criticized that I didn't color match or try to color match, and you know, again, I'm no pro. This is just me fixing a board, you know. But for whatever, for all the haters, I'll go ahead and try to color match this. I know some people say you can use like coffee grounds or you know, something to tint that, but I've got all the different colors here, so I'll see if I can come up with something similar or something at least kind of close to this off-white sun-faded suntan board. All right, so I'm going to do kind of the same thing I did on the other side and try to tape off this color lap that kind of just barely wraps around this side. There we go. And this one, of course, we don't have to lap over. Start with a little bit of laminating resin. And I'm going to do the same thing. Split this and basically pour a little bit in here. Still want to make this opaque, even though it's going over the stringer. I'll probably recreate or make a fake stringer out of some markers or something. But we'll start with white, and then we'll get some yellow in there. Might as well just throw that in there. Use it to stir. A lot of times I'll add a little bit of red, just a little bit. I'll just kind of dab a little bit on the side of the cup. And we don't want this to turn pink, but sometimes that gets us closer to that orangish hue or orangish tone. Way too bright, so we're gonna try to, I'm gonna throw a little bit of black in here. I'm just going to do it the same way, just a little bit of dab on the side of the cup. Just going to pull that in. All these pigments, it's kind of crazy how little you need to use. Again, I'm not very good at this. I'm sure you guys are way better at this than I am. I'm sure there's other videos on how to do this a much better way. It's kind of more of a mustardy Dijon. I don't really like that yet. Okay, I know it sounds weird, but this is purple. I'm just gonna put it right here next to the black. Remember, as long as we're just kind of the similar tone. I'm really not that good at it, but if you do this a lot, you probably get pretty good. There's probably a computer program that'll tell you how to do it, but you know, like the paint matching and all that. Let's just put a little dab on there, so you can see that's not even close. So that's too yellowy and too bright, so we need to bring in maybe some of the darker you know, I would say maybe more browns and more reddish tone to pull that color out. I'm gonna do a little bit more black. Just put it up here at the top so I can just get a little bit. Pull that red down. Just that little bit of red. Let me just show you here. Look at that. That was just a little bit of red. And now it's a lot closer in the same tone or same family as that. And it's not too far off, actually. I think we're good with that. Not all of it, but just a good amount. And then see if we can see what that looks like when we blend it really well. We can always add some white if we need to brighten it up a little bit too. So I think we might be pretty good there. What do you guys think? You think I'm way off, or do you think that's gonna work? Again, this board is kind of splotchy, you know, where it's taking on some water, and it looks like it's kind of darker down here near the tail. So I'm just gonna run with that. We're gonna have a little bit of that same effect here where it's, you know, where it's white and then back to the original color, the faded color, but I think we're good. Let's go ahead and put some catalyst in here, and it's about an ounce here, so we'll do 10. Oh, look at that. That's a pretty good color, but we've got the same issue that we had last time. The transparency is more than I had hoped. Now you're going to be able to see the difference between new versus old. It's actually kind of not that bad though. The transparency kind of gives a little bit of that blotchy look, but you're going to see this line and the difference there. We'll just lay this out, make sure we get all the glass. Again, we've got another chance when we do our sanding resin to do the same tint. We'll just try to get closer with the color on that as well. So here again, I'm not worried about lapping this down. That'll sand right off because it's right at the edge. That's more than enough on there. Actually, it's probably a little too thick, so I should pull some of this out. I know I'm taking the color with it, but it's a little too thick for the laminating resin. We'll just have to do the color with our hot coat. And I really thought we were close on that color, man. I definitely didn't realize it was going to be that transparent, but we had the same issue on the other side, so just goes to show I don't learn from my mistakes. All right, we'll let that cure and then we'll come back with a top coat. All right, so kind of did the same thing here. I went a little darker just because I kind of felt like this was light. You know, if you get this part right here, it's kind of a little bit wet. You can see it's just a little darker shade than that. I'm hoping that I'm not too far off here. Here, let me show you. It's not perfect. I don't know how well you can see that on camera, but I mean, it's as close as I think I can get. But I'm gonna go ahead, it's about 1 ounce. Just gonna do the same thing here, about 10 drops. I'll mix that up. Here goes nothing. I think it'll be fine. At least it kind of covers up that light spot. I'm just gonna let this sit up and then I'll come back and sand that back to the tape. All right, so this is all cured up pretty good. I'm just gonna sand that edge back to the tape, and then same with this, just sand that edge back to the tape. Hopefully it doesn't take off too much of that color. You can see this little edge is kind of coming off right there just from sanding. Sanding it thin enough to where it just kind of breaks apart. We just have a little bit more sanding to do to get rid of that lip. Same with there. A little bit of fiberglass under the tape, and that's fine. Sand that back. Here I'm just going to switch back to doing this part by hand, so we don't get too carried away. But it's kind of nice, this, because it is somewhat translucent, you know, not completely opaque. It's going to kind of blend this, and so even though it's going to be not a perfect match, it won't be a hard line. So this is where we want our tape for that the next layer of glass that we're going to do on the top and the bottom. I guess we'll start with the bottom. But I'm just going to rough this up, get rid of this little transition here, and then for the next glass layer, just going to switch back to the sander here. Well, you can see I'm starting to expose a little bit lighter color here at the edge, so I think I'll stop there. All right, that looks good enough. I think we're ready to go ahead and lay down another layer of glass here on the bottom, and we are going to wrap that around for some strength. This will be probably the hardest part to blend because it's going to have a double lap here on that rail. But we're just doing that for strength. We just want to make sure this is nice and strong. Not going to snap off again. Now I just wipe this down so you can see a little bit better. So we are losing a little bit of color here around the outside. I guess if I were to do this again, I would have that color layer extend a little bit farther up into this area, so that when we feathered it back down flat, we wouldn't lose that color over the white part here. But for what we're doing and for this board, we've got a lot of blotchiness on this anyway. I'm not going to worry about it anymore. That's as far as I'm going to go. At least I tried, guys. You can't say, hey, should have color matched. At least I tried. And overall, it's turning out. And you could leave it like this and probably ride it, you know, even though there is that seam from the glass here at the end. But I just want to make sure that it's going to be really strong, and I'm going to go ahead and just do a second layer. Since I did sand this back pretty well, it's you know, and it's not going to be heavy. It's going to be fine. For a longboard, you're not going to notice it. Now, normally you wouldn't do 2 layers on the bottom and on the top. This has probably just got 2 layers on the top of the board and 1 on the bottom. But because it's completely snapped off, that's why I'm doing this. I just thought I should explain that. I'm just going to do a couple little cuts here. That just helps wrap it around. That'll work. And just one more cut right here. All right. I'll try to get a straight line here for the stringer. And I guess I do need to go to the other side too. There's that. Now this is going to be a little tricky because regular Sharpie will bleed. It'll bleed as soon as you put that resin on here. I do have this kind of Sharpie which does work for under fiberglass. It's like a water base. So I'm hoping that if I just do a little thin line of this brown, even if it does bleed out a little bit, it'll be all right. Or I might just go over it with black, see what that does. I don't know. I'll have to test it out here in a minute. But I was thinking even I could just kind of use a pencil to blend it in, but the pencil is just not the right color, you know, the graphite there. But I'm hoping that a combination of these will come up with something that looks reasonably like a stringer. The other option, I could try to mix up a little batch of resin in a brown color and then just kind of just pour it on here. You know, wipe it on, just do a really thin layer of that under the last layer of glass. But if I had a water-based Sharpie in brown, that would probably work. Let's just see what this even looks like. Just kind of some line type of strokes. Yeah, it's way too dark. Yeah, I don't really like that. Too dark, but I think I'm just gonna go with it anyway. I might just try to lightly sand this. Well, that kind of wiped it off. It didn't really lighten it. Who knows, maybe it won't bleed as bad because I'm kind of wiping some of it off. We'll see. We'll see how that works. Let's do the same thing up here. It looks a lot darker on this color up here. See, it looks like it's a much darker shade. That doesn't look too great. But I'm just gonna do it like this and then hit it with sandpaper again, see what that looks like. Looks like I took off a little too much there. Yeah, I don't really know how to come up with a lighter shade there. So the whole stringer thing, I'm probably spending more time than I need to on this, but I found this peach colored, the water-based version of that Sharpie, and that looks like it's blending in a little bit after doing that darker brown base, and maybe this will help prevent it from bleeding through. But this just kind of lightens it up a little bit because that darker brown was just way too dark. I think that'll work. If anything, it kind of helps with helps it look like a little bit of a wood grain pattern through there. That looks okay. I think it's going to be all right. If anything, this version here too, once I let it dry, might be a little bit better than this one by itself, because this might actually protect some of that stuff from bleeding through onto the other side. But let's take a look and see. Kind of, yeah, it looks all right. All right, Sharpie bled through a little bit right there, but that's okay. Looks like my tape took off just a little flake of glass right there. Before doing this last coat of glass, I think I'd feel better if I filled that back in, so I'm going to do that real quick. All right, this is just a very, very small amount there, just to get one drop. There we go. So we just did a little quick patch right here, and it's still kind of gummy, so I think if I try to sand it, I'll just pull it. It'll just pull right out. But if I can just get it cut down like that. Okay, finally, we're done. Kind of messed up my glass there, but that's all right. Still gonna work. Got about 1.5 ounces. We'll do 15 drops of catalyst. Well, that fake stringer actually is turning out okay. Probably a little better than I thought. Just make sure this glass where I lapped it is completely saturated, which looks like it was. The coloring that I was talking about, where it's kind of faded. When I did the last layer, I should have done the color a little bit farther in, so I could have blended that a little bit better, but that's all right. Again, this is just a light layer of this laminating resin just to make sure that this all sticks. I'll Hopefully this will curl around and stick. Looks like it's pretty good. Yeah, that lap on the bottom turned out pretty nice. Both sides, it's completely covered, primarily over this seam, which is what was important. So I'm going to mix up a quick hot coat sanding resin just to go over the top of this. Now you really don't have to wait too long after doing the laminating to do sanding resin right over the top of it. So this is about an ounce, just 10 drops of catalyst. But really that's as good as it's going to look as far as the color goes, but that's all right. At least it's not bright white. And that blotchiness just kind of goes with the rest of the board. As long as we get this everywhere over the top, that's all that really matters. Just everywhere that there was laminating resin, that will help us sand this out. And we will need to sand this, especially on those rails, just a little bit, just to prep for the layer that we're going to do right on the top. Just a thin coat over the top of that laminating resin will allow us to sand this. I read somewhere that sanding and laminating resin are exactly the same material, except that the sanding resin has some sort of a wax or something like that that allows you to sand it. Otherwise, if you try to sand just laminating resin without putting sanding resin over it, it stays gummy, and it kind of ruins your sandpaper. I guess I could have done this all at once, you know, just done the laminating resin on the bottom and then flip it and done the laminating resin on top and then done sanding resin over both, but this still works. And this is similar to how I did that other broken off nose. Now I'm going to let that cure enough so it's at least sandable. All right, that's pretty much cured and ready to sand. I'm just gonna kind of hit some of these edges here where it's that glass kind of stuck up just a little bit. Now, since we're also gonna lap over on this side, just to make sure that it bonds here, because this is or was sanding resin, I'm just gonna rough this up here too. All right, we'll flip this over. And since this was sanding resin over the laminating, we do need to sand that in order to get the next layer to bond. We just want to make sure that that next layer will stick. And then of course we need to tape off the leash plug here too. Now this time I'm going to cut it a little bit closer just to the opening for the leash string. You know, that way it'll seal. The new glass will just kind of seal right over that leash cup. And then I think we can just kind of sand it back once that's all cured. That'll at least keep the glass from getting down inside there. I think that'll work. I'm just going to do a couple little cuts here. This should be our last pour with laminating resin. Should be enough right there. Wrapping the glass, you know, all the way around both times, I think will make it a stronger rail and less likely to get banged up. Sanding resin over the top of that, and then we should be good. It's been a much longer project than I hoped, but this should be our last pour here, the last little mix. Just a little bit of sanding resin, about an ounce. And that's it. Let that cure, and then we'll come back and do some sanding on that, and we'll be done. All right, so I've got it moved outside here just so we don't make too much of a mess in the garage. This is all cured up, and then we're just going to start sanding back to expose the tape line, and we'll smooth this out a little bit. I'm first going to start with just some 80 grit, then we'll work our way up. But I'm just going to do the top here first. I'm going to open up this leash plug tape here, and then just kind of smooth out some of those rough edges. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the rail. I'll hit it a little bit, but as we get closer, I'll switch to just doing it by hand. I just want to stop here for a minute so you can see we're getting our tape sanded off, which just kind of lets me know that we're right there and I need to stop and then move on to the other areas until that's all blended in. And then we'll just make sure the rest of this is nice and smooth, and then we'll expose our leash plug here, and then we'll switch to some finer grit. I actually just switched. This is 100 grit right now. You can see the tape stuff gets really stuck in the pad here, so I'm just going to move it, rotate it a little bit because it's easier for me to kind of do this edge of the sander. There it is. That's perfect. That's exactly what I was going for. So see, we've still got a little bit of glass overlapping on that leash plug, and that'll keep it nice and waterproof. Then we're just going to smooth out some of these little high spots and nicks here, and then we'll flip it over and do the other side. Just remember, really light on the rails if you're using the electric sander here with a battery sander, and then it's a little bit easier to do by hand. But I'm going to just do a couple more, just another few seconds here, and then I'll flip the board over. So here we're going to do the same thing just to sand back this edge. Right, we're getting pretty close here. We're kind of starting to expose it here. We'll just keep going here on this. This is kind of rough from that lap and those cuts, and we just want to get that blended in flat. Everything's pretty much where we need it as far as the sanding level, but of course this is still really rough. So now we can switch to some finer grits and get this all smoothed out. I am going to use the sander one last time, but this is 240, and then I'll probably switch to some finer stuff, whatever I've got, and finish it up by hand. Do the same thing here on the underside. This is again that 240. All right, so same thing on the rails. Just gonna use this same 240 pad. Just try to sand that nice and smooth. And so right now I'm just gonna wet this. Kind of makes the sandpaper glide a little bit smoother, a little bit better. If I had a finer grit sandpaper, I'd probably go to a 400 or 600 and then maybe finish with an 8 or even 1,000 if I really cared. But this is all I've got, so I think that's what we're gonna end up with. Same thing on the top here. All right, well, that's pretty much where I'm gonna stop. You can see this is not perfect by any means. The color match, you know, you can obviously see the difference there, but it's good enough. Good enough for what I needed, which is, you know, hey, from a distance it doesn't look so bad. And of course there's a tail here now, so we'll just have to live with that color variation. I don't know if it looks worse or better on camera. And here's the top side, just to kind of give you a once over of how that turned out. You can see, of course, the variation in the color and the different layers. And I stopped at that 220. That's all I had, but I did do it as a wet sand, and it came out okay. So sorry for the long video. I hope you liked it. Hopefully you found it helpful. And I know this isn't perfect. I kind of shared my mistakes along the way, but it's definitely solid, definitely watertight, and wife's happy. She just saw the repair and she was pretty stoked. So I'm gonna let the sun take off the rest of the wax and clean it up and get it ready to get back out in the water. Hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description to a couple of the other videos that I've done on surfboard repair. One of them, the audio is terrible. There's music playing and you can't really hear what I'm saying. So hopefully between the two of these videos, you can get an idea on how to fix something like this. But thanks so much for watching and good luck.